Hello and welcome. Is the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy sacrificing his soldiers against any military logic in Bakhmut? This and more in this situation report. The Russian Air Force has now, for the first time, shown to use UPAB 1,500 V bombs against Ukraine. This is what the Ukrainians are reporting. It's a bomb with a 1,000 kilogram warhead. Is a gliding bomb, so it has no own propulsion, but is rather dropped from a high altitude to reach up to 40 kilometers distance until it hits, guided by satellite navigation and internal navigation. The issue, though, is with those bombs, while they can be dropped with Sukhoi 34, Sukhoi 24M, Sukhoi 35, and MiG 35, and they are very accurate. So the Russians have a wide variety of platforms to drop them from, and they are probably very accurate and very powerful. The issue is they have to be dropped from high altitude to even reach that 40 kilometers. The higher the speed of the plane, the higher the drop altitude, the further it reaches. This might put them into the reach of ground-based air defense system from the Ukrainian side. As it has said, 40 kilometers is the maximum distance, and a target that justifies a bomb like this is probably not directly at the front line. So the bombers have to reach probably within 30 kilometers or even less of the front line at high altitude, which would turn them into an ideal target for either Patriot, S-300, NASAMS, or anything like this. We also see now on Twitter, we found this video, which is a Russian air defense system here in Tuapse. Tuapse is along the Black Sea coast here along the south, where the Ukrainian side has used drones to strike the oil and gas facilities there. Now we see that an air defense system, Panzer, is stationed there. It is an interesting mixture of both air-to-ground missiles as well as machine cannons, autocannons that can both be used to defend against aerial threats. The issue with this is, or the specifics of these are, while this system will probably be good enough to defend against Ukrainian drone, this system, which we see here now is no longer available to be along the front lines by the Russians, which is one of the huge effects these Ukrainian drone offensives have by spreading out the Russian forces, by making sure they can't purely concentrate on Ukraine. On the eastern front north of the Siversky Donetsk, we have a Ukrainian counterattack reported from the Russian side close to Liman Pershi and Vlishana, which is here. Apparently it didn't reach far, but we see more and more reports about Ukrainian counteroffensives north of the Siversky Donetsk, showing that the initiative is slowly sliding out of the hands of the Russians again, that their dominance along the battlefield seemingly is more or less over. Other than that, we have reports of continued heavy fighting south of Kremina and southwest, especially in these forests here. The fighting supposedly is still very intensive and ongoing. There's also fighting in the area to its northwest, more or less west and southwest of Chervono-Popivka. In these areas, while fighting is continuing, I have no reports whatsoever that show me that the territorial control has changed in any ways in this area. South of the Siversky Donetsk, the fighting is continuing. We have fighting north of Bakhmut, for instance, in the direction of Vasyukivka, and in other areas there are attacks continuing in this regard, but it seems increasingly that those attacks are no longer being done with full force, with the actual full intent to and the conviction to break through the Ukrainian lines. This seems increasingly, at least from a observer's perspective, like this is now more or less probing the Ukrainian lines and fixing them in place, rather than a serious attempt to expand territorial control north of Bakhmut. This is different, though, when it comes to the right direct north and northwest. We have reports of Russian attacks in the area here along Dubova, Vasilivka, We have attacks in the direction of Hormove and in the direction of Bonanivka. Here they are now confirmed to be in this area here. They are now increasingly advancing further south towards the road here. The situation itself is getting more and more precarious. We have a map here that is from more or less pro-Ukrainian side, but you can see how the situation is changing. This map is now several hours old, and it's no longer correct, but you see how close the lines of communications are under threat. And this is Hormove. The road here is no longer usable, and it is either about to be reached or already reached by the Russian forces. Generally, the Russians are closing in on Bodanivka, which we already said, and the Ukrainian have now we have image proofs, visual evidence that the Ukrainians have given up everything east of the Bakhmut river, which is here. So this area is now evacuated by the Ukrainians, but from what we see right now, at least at the time of recording, there seems to still not be any general withdrawal from Bakhmut itself. All they did was blow up the bridge here and withdrew over the river their forces that have been east of it. Right now, with the bridge being blown up here, the Ukrainians are now saying it was actually the Russians that blew up the bridge here. This means that the northern line of communication is more or less unusable now, especially with the Russians about to reach it or already having reached that road. That only leaves the route here, the T0504 in the direction west through Ivanivske as the last line of communication that is confirmed usable for the Ukrainians, even though there might be some option of some dirt roads in between the two roads still being able to be used by the Ukrainians. We have a video in this regard that is supposed to show us a Ukrainian TR4 that is see here the shape it made it out, and supposedly it is a IFV that broke out from Bakhmut. You see the damage it took. See, it obviously has been hit in the front, maybe even with an RPG, as you can see the sled armor in pieces, tires being blown. So while this BTR, this IFV made it out, it shows us the threat they are under while they are doing it, because the last road that is available is no longer under full Ukrainian control and can be shot at will by the Russian side. The Russians are also attacking further south. We have reports of fighting around Avdiivka. There are some confirmed reports in the direction of Nevelske and some likely reports in the direction of Pervomaiske. Further south, we have fighting in Marinka, and from Marinka, we have a series of impressive pictures. See here how the city has been turned into rubble. While this is still just somewhat damaged, you see other areas where there's basically hardly any building left. See the massive damage of the city, and the bigger scale pictures are really impressive, really showing the devastation of the Russian fighting for that city now for a whole year. The city was on the front line from day one. For a full year, the Ukrainians are still fighting for the city, that you can see here. And we can see, we look on the map from the reports, the front line is now more or less through the center of the city along that route here. This whole area, the whole area is still under fighting. And as I said, within a year, the Russians have advanced a mere 3 kilometers through their town, and we can see the signs of it very well on those pictures. The Ukrainian General Staff is saying Shoigu was meeting, it was publicized too, that he met the commander of the Eastern Military District, Colonel General Husam Muradov. His units are among those fighting for Vuhledar, and he supposedly, according to the Ukrainian General Staff, ordered Husam Muradov to take Vuhledar at all costs. So while the fighting at Vuhledar has died down for now, and I don't have fresh reports about fighting for that, at least according to if the Ukrainian general staff is right here, we should see a fresh offensive in that direction and more desperate attempts by the Russians to take the town regardless of those losses. Along the southern front, the Ukrainians are saying the Russians are actually preparing an offensive here. They some tactical shaping of the front line to improve their positions for a further offensive. This is what the Ukrainians say. Whether it's likely is a different question. According to my estimation, the Russians shouldn't have the potential for a serious offensive there, especially as they are running increasingly having manpower troubles along the Donbass front themselves. Opening a new front for a new offensive there that is supposed to reach goals further than a few kilometers down the road seems highly unlikely. So it seems fairly unlikely that this is the actual case, but as I said, what the Ukrainians are saying us. Generally, when we talk about the situation, especially when it comes to Bakhmut, obviously we need to take a special emphasis on this. The situation is that those lines of communication that are left in Bakhmut, none of them is not under fire control by the Russians. There is only one paved road confirmed to still be usable for the Ukrainians, but even that is under fire control, meaning the Russians can likely see at least parts of the road with direct line of sight and directly fire at it, while the northern route is probably completely unusable. There might be some chance of some dirt roads being used here, that some roads can lead through that area, for instance. There's always some possibility, but the only confirmed we have is the T0504, which is going here, and as you can see, some side roads going further north, some more visual protection from the Russian side. But even there, the Russians are creeping in and are pushing on it, and from the high ground here, they likely have line of sight, at least in some regards, on that. Every traffic that is happening on the remaining lines of communication can now be fought at and can now be shot at with artillery and air units, be it helicopters or plane, and that is what is being reported. The road to Chasiv Yar here in the north is likely no longer usable because of the bridge that was blown by the Russians in Romove. At least that's what the Ukrainian General Staff is saying. There are also rumors that Ukraine has already withdrawn its best units from Bakhmut, meaning they are basically sending unprepared, less equipped, less trained forces into Bakhmut to keep fighting there while their elite being saved for a later point. Increasingly, the protection, the defense of the city is becoming questionable, whether it makes sense and whether how long the Ukrainians will be able to continue. But of course, at the same time, we need to say that as long as Ukraine is still fighting for Bakhmut, they fix a huge amount of Russian forces in place, as the Russians have numerical superiority there to even be able to push the Ukrainians back. They need significant forces there that at the same time can't do anything else, that can't be used anywhere else. We see the result of this, that the only real territorial gains in the last few weeks are basically around Bakhmut. Might have gained a little bit in the north here. They might have gained 3 kilometers west of Crimea, but that's more or less it. They have not achieved anything further because they put every unit they can muster into Bakhmut, send it into the meat grinder, and are suffering heavy loss. So while the Ukrainians are fixing those units in place, while they make sure they can't fight anywhere else, at the same time they slow down the Russians as well by fighting for Bakhmut. As soon as they evacuate Bakhmut and establish a new front line, that front line will automatically be closer to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Now, the analysis are different, whether and how much the Russians can use the loss or the capture of Bakhmut then to advance further. I don't see a reason why this should lead to some kind of breakthrough of the Russians gaining 30 kilometers in a single day, because there are tons of potential positions for the Ukrainians to fortify, and the end of Bakhmut is in sight. So building lines of fortifications behind the front is just a logical thing to do, and so far we've seen the Ukrainians doing it all the time. So I don't see why any breakthrough seems to be likely. Still, though, as long as Bakhmut is contested, Russians can't use those forces to push in other directions and continue their advances there. They are undoubtedly causing heavy losses on the Russian side as well. There are rumors and estimations which are completely unfounded, completely unconfirmed from my side, so I will not take them up. Ukrainians claim they have a kill ratio of 7-1, so for every Ukrainian soldier, 7 Russian soldiers are fighting. That would actually be justifiable to continue the fighting there, regarding the discrepancy of forces and the discrepancy of population of both countries. If the Ukrainians are actually able to grind down the Russians with such a loss ratio, continuous fighting would massively help the Ukrainians in the long run, would help the Ukrainian counteroffensive is expected in the next few months to start. Right now, the Telegram, Alexander Khodakovsky, who is a commander of the so-called DNR unit, and a military blogger, he's actually now questioning publicly on his Telegram channel whether the fixation on Vuhledar and Bakhmut wasn't a big mistake, because it might allow the Ukrainians to use the exhaustion of the Russian forces to then somewhere else. In the German tabloid Bild, there was an article that Zelenskyy was supposedly already asking weeks ago, not months, but weeks ago, to withdraw from Bakhmut for tactical reasons, and that Zelenskyy refused it and forces the Russian units to continue. Ukrainian units to continue. We have a Telegram report here now that is from the Ukrainian president, where from the Ukrainian president's office, according to which Zelenskyy is currently supporting the defense of Bakhmut. But in total, we have to say it's cannot really, this might be a PR stunt basically to address the criticism that is public about the Ukrainian continued defense of a town where everyone can read a map sees an encirclement and the destruction of those forces. Now, this obviously begs the question: what is Zelenskyy doing here? Is he mad? Why doesn't he listen to his top general and withdraw? And there we have to say this is nothing new in history. We have an example from this very war, where, according to international reports and everything we know, it seems to be likely that the Russian commanders wanted to withdraw from the right bank of the Dnipro months ago before it actually happened, and Putin refused to give permission despite the lines of communication being under daily shelling with HIMARS system. The reason for that was obvious. Giving up the eastern bank of the Dnipro means Russia is basically giving up any serious chance to reach Odessa and then connect with Transnistria. So basically this would mean a strategic defeat, and a defeat in regards to the political goals of getting a full stranglehold on Ukraine, on its economy, by gaining a position to basically cut it off from the Black Sea. In a military sense, it perfectly made sense to withdraw over the river. If you can't muster enough forces to continue your offensive, and you increasingly have trouble to supply your units that are in place, then why would you continue doing that if all you achieve is additional losses and the risk of even bigger losses? So it made perfect military sense to withdraw, but it didn't make political sense, because the political mission of this war is to gain control over Ukraine, either by military or by political means. That you need to control Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa, and in a bigger scheme to reach closer to the Carpathic Mountains, I think it's correct English pronunciation. To reach closer to them, you basically have to reach Moldova as well. In this regard, giving up Kherson was unacceptable for the Russian bigger planning, but for that to understand that, you need to both understand the economic and the political reasons to do that, whereas the military commander just has interest how he maintains his force structure, how he does damage to the enemy, how he wins his battles. He might very well not understand goal of the politician, of the political side of this, to win the war. There's another famous example for this where it also happened. This is the Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Autumn of 1941, the generals wanted to send the troops to Moscow to reach Moscow and hopefully gain a solution for the war, basically force the Soviet Union into surrender by capturing its capital. Hitler refused, and he redirected the forces south to win Ukraine. There was another big encirclement battle there with huge Russian losses, or Soviet losses, but that cost the Wehrmacht the time it needed to reach Moscow by winter. Now, to continue this a little bit, I still don't think that reaching Moscow, capturing Moscow would have ended the war. But to go back to the example here, the reason for Hitler to decide that was either he thought the war will be won anyways, or capturing Moscow will likely not bring the conclusion, but at the same time he was aware that he needs the resources both from Donbass, from the mines there, coal, iron ore, and he needs the rich grain fields of the southern Ukraine, where to be able to keep feeding the occupied Europe, and especially the German armed forces and the German population, especially in regards to the historic experiences from World War I, where the blockade led to widespread famine within Germany. So Hitler decided to redirect the forces south for economic and political reasons. Economic reasons to gain resources, continue the fighting, and for economic reasons to be able to feed his population, and for political reasons that to stay in power you need to be able to keep feeding your population. You need to be able to supply your allies so they stick by your side and don't get deposed themselves or don't switch sides to be able to get food from the other side. So political reasons made him turn the south, whereas the military logic would have been just go for the capital and hope you win it there, and don't care about some open fields in southern Russia. Whether that decision was right or wrong would be another discussion, but the historic context, we see it right here playing out in Ukraine. We have the Ukrainian president making a decision that is against pure direct military logic. If you see this here, looking on the map, we see an encirclement, an operational encirclement already in effect, and a physical encirclement about to happen. It seems just a question of bad luck. And within the next half hour, the whole units here and some numbers that you find, I have no idea how close to the truth they are, but they're talking about up to 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers in Bakhmut. One bad luck, one successful Russian attack, and those units might be fully encircled with physical forces basically having the Russian front line completely around them. It is obviously, at least looking on the map, that is a massive threat to the Ukrainians, and not one that will likely lose them the war, but one that is would be an absolute disaster for both morale and of the forces, etc., and for the people being lost. So why does Zelenskyy do this? Now, obviously, I can just take the hints, the historic examples, and I can take other things. I can't look into his mind. But the obvious reason here is not only might he understand that Bakhmut is slowing down the Russians in advancing further to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, but by now Bakhmut has achieved morale, an importance in regards to morale, and an importance regards to politics, that it needs to be kept defended. Zelenskyy himself visited the town just a few months ago, talked to soldiers close to the front line. He visited it himself, and he took the Ukrainian flag that was signed by defenders. Some of them might have fallen by now, and he took that flag to the US Congress when he spoke there and handed it over to the Americans. So with the Russian effort for several months to conquer Bakhmut, and Ukrainian successful defense, more or less, to still be able to hold Bakhmut, that the city has reached an importance for both sides that far exaggerates its actual value. Now, Bakhmut is not useless. It's a crossroads. A lot of different lines of communications are going through there. The Russians won't really be able to advance further north towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, which they urgently need to win Donbass, to control Donbass. But they won't be able to do that without Bakhmut. But Bakhmut itself is not a prize that is anywhere close. Thus, it should not be a prize for either the Russians to let tens of thousands probably die in the fighting for it, and neither should it be for the Ukrainians to risk an encirclement of that degree, which they are doing right now. But politics play a role here. As soon as Russia captures Bakhmut, it will be a blow to the Ukrainian morale, and it will raise Russian morale that finally Bakhmut, the city that has been fought so long for, there was this huge victory, like the Russians turned the capture of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk to a huge victory, even though those cities, as we can see, didn't decide anything, the capture of those. But by fighting for them, they gain value. And then, of course, you can somewhat associate the sunken cost fallacy into that. So by having lost so many forces over that town, by having committed so many forces into that town, you've reached a point where you can't just withdraw or you can't just stop your fighting. In this regard, we see the direct conflict, if the Bild tabloid report is true, but it seems likely. We see the direct conflict of both sides, military logic and political logic going head to head, because while they might often coincide, while they might often plan for the same, have the same ideas, they don't necessarily do that all the time. As a politician, Zelenskyy needs to think about other things that a military commander has to do, and we see the result playing out right here. Whether that is going to be a smart decision or not, obviously, we will have to see in the future. Right now, we can't really say it. If the Russians manage to fully physically encircle the troops in Bakhmut, it'll have been a disaster. That much is already sure, but as of now, they aren't encircled yet. Let's come to the other news we have about the war. We have here a news from Wagner. Wagner is now reporting that Wagner now has recruitment centers in 30 cities. As we've heard in the past, basically Wagner can't more because its former potential to recruit in Russia were former soldiers. Former soldiers that are still in fighting age probably are rather fight in the Russian armed forces now, and prisoners are the mission to recruit prisoners in colonies was taken away from Prigozhin, so he can't recruit them anymore. He doesn't want Wagner to become irrelevant through combat losses, which they obviously sustain as long as they are on the front line, and having them on the front line gives Prigozhin his importance. He doesn't want to fade into obscurity. He needs to build up his forces again. He needs fresh sources of recruitment, and for that, they're obviously now running 30 recruitment. See here what they are writing, what is necessary to join Wagner. We have reports from a woman in Moscow that was arrested by the FSB, now getting in front of court for crime of treason, because supposedly the Russian FSB is saying that she supported Ukraine's armed forces financially. We have an even weirder news here, and this is from a Russian news source. This is RIA Novosti. It actually says that a man from St. Petersburg wanted to join Ukraine to fight against Russia because he was unhappy with this. He tried to cross in the Bryansk region. He tried to cross over here into Ukraine, but it failed. So he bought a wetsuit, he bought fins, and he tried to swim from Crimea to Odessa. He was apparently caught with that, and he's now facing treason. Well, the threat of treason. Swimming from Crimea to Odessa is just 190 kilometers with a wetsuit and fins. I have to say, either that man is an absolute nut job, or he would have been the best naval special forces guy Ukraine can hope for, because even with a wetsuit and some fins, even with a life vest on, I would not try to swim 190 kilometers myself, even with fins and a wetsuit, and it seems to have been in winter as well. So an absolute madman here, whether in a daring way or because he's actually mentally sick. But the Russians are saying they apprehended him, and he's now being sentenced. He's facing court for high treason and illegal crossing of the border. There's one video I can't show you. I've reposted it on my Twitter account, which you can find by just googling my name. But Russian soldiers have filmed themselves killing a Ukrainian prisoner of war simply for the crime, who was unarmed, was in their control, simply for the crime of saying Slava Ukraini, another war crime, one of many, and again being documented in the video. When it comes to the international support, we now hear that Great Britain is giving another batch of 14 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. I made a video about the tanks that Ukraine is receiving, and it's going to be published the coming Sunday. So if you want to see that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss those videos. 14 more Challengers, so in total it's 28 now. And according to the still is staying in the sphere of support, of international support. According to The Economist, China is unhappy that the fact that it was negotiating with Russia for weapon sales became public. Apparently, some Russian officials spilled their beans and allowed the West to find out and publish it openly, which is very displeasing the Russians. Very displeasing to the Russians. We have here now a video of a German Gepard PAA. Supposedly it is somewhere on the eastern frontier, and which would then be an indication of not just using it for fighting Shahid, but also if it's driving around here, we would expect it to get ready to support a Ukrainian offensive actions. Otherwise, they would be used rather statically, but it might be a little too early to expect this to be a direct sign of Ukrainian offensive. We have news from Rheinmetall, the German defense company. They are saying they want to buy Leopard 1 from the Swiss RUA company, a defense company. They are having 96 in storage that they bought from Italy. And Rheinmetall wants to refurbish them and give them to Ukraine, but that needs permission from the Swiss Security Council, which so far has, in regards to its neutrality, refused any deliveries of weaponry towards Ukraine. So why this is supposed to work this time, I have no idea, but at least that's the media saying that. And also Germany is now negotiating or trying to negotiate with Switzerland to buy stored Leopard 2A4s from Switzerland. I think Switzerland has like 50 to 80 of them in storage. And Germany actually is negotiating with Switzerland about that, and is going to promise if Germany receives those tanks, they are not being given to Ukraine. The whole idea is to basically backfill other nations that give tanks to Ukraine. So right now we have, for instance, Norway has Leopard 2A4s in its current armed forces, and every tank, or the Poles as well, and every tank they hand over to Ukraine needs to be replaced, or it'll open a gap in the current force structure. And if you suddenly have 90 Leopard 2A4s that are usable, that can be given to some country immediately, that would allow other countries to basically hand over 90 Leopard 2s without any loss in capabilities, immediately being able to replace them without violating Swiss neutrality. This is the other thing that is currently happening. So we have reached the end. I hope it was interesting to you. If you liked what I do here, I would appreciate the thumbs up button. Some comments with your thoughts. What do you think? Is the decision to keep fighting for Bakhmut justified? Is it smart? Or do you think it is a disaster in waiting, and Zelenskyy should have rather listened to Zaluzhny, who is his supreme commander, who is the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, so a military expert? Should he have listened to that, or do you think it is justifiable to fighting for Bakhmut? Leave your comments in the comment section. That can start interesting debates, and it obviously helps with the algorithm as well. If you're here for the first time, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you so by the means in the description, and thank you very much to everyone already supported. That's it from me for now for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.